"Mister, please, they hurt my big brother," a barefoot boy sobbed, grabbing a Hell's Angel's sleeve at a gas station. His wheelchair-bound brother was being beaten by older teens who'd been extorting them for months. The biker Crow almost walked away. Not his fight. But the boy's terror pulled him 3 blocks to a cinder-block house. Inside, a 19-year-old with muscular dystrophy lay on the floor, face bloody, chair toppled. Crow's own brother had been bullied. Revenge only landed him in prison. So he made a different call. His name was Crow, a Hell's Angel with a prison record for revenge gone wrong. The barefoot boy who grabbed his sleeve told him his wheelchair-bound big brother was being beaten. Crow's fists clenched, but he remembered his own wasted years. Within hours, 40 bikers were rolling, not for violence, but for something far more unexpected. To understand why a biker gang chose construction over carnage, you have to know the 2 kids they were protecting. Marcus was 19, a sharp mind locked inside a body that betrayed him more every year. Muscular dystrophy had put him in a motorized chair at 12. He wasn't supposed to make it past 18, yet there he was, quoting physics textbooks from memory, tutoring his little brother in algebra. Jordan was 10, a solemn boy with scraped knees and too many adult worries. Their mother died of an overdose 3 years earlier. Their father was a ghost somewhere in Arizona. The 2 of them lived on disability checks in a crumbling cinder-block rental on the wrong side of the tracks, surviving on cereal and canned soup, fiercely protective of each other. Marcus would joke that Jordan was his arms and legs. Jordan would insist that Marcus was his brain. That bond was all they had. For 6 months, a group of older teenagers from the neighborhood had turned that bond into a hell. It started small. A shove on the sidewalk, a stolen bag of groceries, a sneer about the wheelchair. It escalated to weekly demands for cash under threat of violence. They took Marcus's disability money twice, leaving the boys with nothing but a jar of peanut butter for an entire month. They slashed the tires on Marcus's chair once, laughing as he dragged himself 3 blocks home on his elbows. The police filed reports and did nothing. The boys who ran the crew had family in the sheriff's department. To the system, Marcus and Jordan were 2 orphan black boys in a forgotten rental, the kind of case file that falls to the bottom of a stack and never rises. They had no one. Then came the afternoon it all broke. It was a Tuesday in July, the pavement so hot you could fry an egg. Jordan had walked to the corner store for a gallon of milk and a box of macaroni, the only things they could afford. When he returned, the front door was kicked inward. He dropped the milk and ran inside. Marcus lay on the living room floor, face swollen, blood pooling from a split above his eye. His motorized chair was toppled beside him, wheels still spinning. The teens had ambushed him, dragged him from his chair, kicked his ribs, and warned him that if he or his kid brother ever talked to anyone, they'd torch the house with both of them inside. The leader, a 17-year-old named Darnell, had spit on Marcus's face before leaving. Marcus had lain on the floor for over an hour, unable to move, choking on the smell of his own blood. Jordan tried the neighbors. The first house didn't answer the door. The second pulled the curtain shut. A third told him through the screen door, "I don't want no trouble with those boys." With no phone, no car, and no adult to call, Jordan ran. He ran 6 blocks barefoot on blistering asphalt, tears and snot streaking his face, until he stumbled into the truck stop gas station on the county highway. There, he saw a massive motorcycle, a gleaming road glide, and a man in a leather vest emblazoned with a death's head. Crow, a Hell's Angel. Crow was a man who had spent 8 years in a state penitentiary for what he did to his own little brother's bullies 2 decades earlier. He had broken bones and shattered lives, and he wore the regret of that rage like a second skin. When the sobbing child grabbed his sleeve and gasped out the story, Crow felt the old fire ignite in his chest. His fists clenched. He could see himself, age 19, standing over his own brother's bruised body, picking up a baseball bat. But he also saw the cell, the wasted years, the parole hearings. He hesitated. Not his fight. He looked at the boy's bare feet, red and blistered. He looked at the terror in those eyes, a terror he recognized from his own childhood. He drove Jordan back to the house alone. He didn't call the police. The boy had made it clear that would make things worse. He walked inside, saw Marcus crumpled on the floor, saw the overturned chair, saw the absolute squalor of two kids abandoned by every system supposed to protect them. The rage burned, but this time he didn't let it consume him. He helped Marcus back into his chair, cleaned his face with a rag, and asked for the names and addresses of the boys who did it. Then he stepped outside into the twilight, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number he hadn't used in 2 years. "Prez," he said quietly, "I need a favor, not the usual kind. Bring every man who can swing a hammer and keep his mouth shut, and call the nurse from the charity run and your cousin Jake at the sheriff's office. I got 2 kids here who need an army." What came the next morning wasn't a brawl. It was 40 bikers, a ramp contractor, a medical professional, and a cop who'd finally listen. The extortionists had no idea what was rolling toward their doorstep. The next morning at dawn, the rumble of engines woke the entire block. 40 Harleys rolled up in perfect formation, chrome glinting through the orange sunrise. At the front, Crow led them, his face unreadable. Behind him came a flatbed truck loaded with lumber and concrete, a panel van with a Red Cross decal, and a contractor's pickup. The neighbors gathered on porches, fearing the worst. They knew who the Hells Angels were. TV had taught them to expect drugs and violence. But these men didn't throw a single punch. They parked, they unloaded, and they got to work. Crow gathered the core crew on the dead lawn. Among them was Rebar, a grizzled chapter president who'd done time for the same revenge Crow had. Lisa, a registered nurse from the chapter's charity arm who volunteered at homeless clinics twice a month. And Jake, an off-duty sheriff's deputy who was also Crow's cousin. Crow laid it out. The boys were unprotected, the system had failed. A rival gang of teenagers thought they owned the street. "We're not going to beat them," Crow said. "We're going to bury them in concrete and paperwork. We fix the house. We file the report. We make these kids untouchable. Then we sit on them until the threat goes away. No blood, no headlines, just presence." Rebar nodded. "My nephew owns a security company. I'll get cameras up by noon." Lisa had already vanished inside with Marcus, checking his vitals, dressing the gash above his eye, documenting every bruise for Jake's report. Jake took the boy's statement, his badge an ironic shield. This time, the complaint wouldn't vanish into the ether. Out front, a ramp contractor named Spider jackhammered the crumbling front steps and poured a smooth concrete incline wide enough for Marcus's chair. Others replaced the flimsy back door with reinforced steel, installed motion sensor floodlights, and patched holes in the walls that let in winter drafts. A tall biker called Tiny, his neck tattooed with a rosary, knelt beside Jordan and showed him how to work the new video doorbell. "Anybody messes with you, you hit this button. We'll see you in real time and be here in 90 seconds. Jordan's eyes welled up. No one had ever offered him a button. By midday, word had spread. Darnell and his crew came around the corner just after 2 in the afternoon. They froze at the sight of 24 leather-clad beards, half of them on the roof replacing shingles, the other half unpacking groceries that Lisa had ordered from a wholesale supplier. Darnell, who'd kicked Marcus in the ribs 2 days earlier, suddenly looked very small. He started to posture, calling out taunts about dirty bikers, but his voice cracked. Rebar simply stood at the edge of the property line, arms crossed. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Darnell's boys shuffled backwards. They'd come expecting 2 skinny orphans cowering inside. They found a fortress under construction. That first day, the bikers installed a complete security system, resupplied the kitchen with 3 months of food, and erected a temporary watch post in the side yard, a canvas canopy with a space heater and a mounted camera feed. The off-duty deputy handed a formal police report to a supervisor who, for once, had no family ties to Darnell's clan. Charges would be filed: aggravated assault, robbery, criminal threats. The wheels of law, long stuck, began to turn. But the major pivot came when Lisa emerged from the house with Marcus, the boy's face clean and his eyes clear for the first time in years. She had called a specialist she knew from the charity network, a neurologist who volunteered her time for families of members. An appointment was scheduled. A new motorized chair, a Bether model, was donated by a man whose own son had muscular dystrophy. The bikers weren't just patching a house, they were rebuilding a life. That's when the neighborhood began to shift. An elderly woman brought over a pot of gumbo. A young father offered his pickup for supply runs. The isolation that had trapped these boys since their mother died began to crack open, not with fear, but with food and flashlights. Then the real revelation hit. A local journalist got a tip about gang activity and arrived with a camera crew expecting a standoff. She found something else entirely. Rebar sat her down and explained with surprising patience the chapter's long-standing charity work, the pediatric cancer fundraisers, the annual coat drive, the silent network of nurses and contractors and off-duty deputies who moved through underprivileged communities like a shadow welfare state. The footage went viral. In 24 hours, the story flipped, from bikers invading a neighborhood to bikers saving two forgotten children. The extortionists, once bullies, became the villains in a town that had suddenly found its conscience. Darnell's crew didn't like that. 2 nights later, they came back, 10 of them this time, emboldened by cheap alcohol and a rumor that the bikers had pulled out. They crept up the alley, baseball bats in hand, expecting to retake their turf and teach Marcus a final lesson. They didn't know about the floodlights. They didn't know about the cameras. They didn't know that Tiny, Rebar, and 5 others were sleeping in shifts in the living room, dressed and ready. The instant the motion sensors tripped, the entire property erupted in white light. The bikers didn't rush out swinging. They simply formed a line across the backyard, silent, arms crossed, exactly as Rebar had done before. Jake, the deputy, stepped forward and placed Darnell under arrest on an outstanding warrant. The other 9 boys scattered, their bravado shattered. The extortionists had slunk into silence, but the arrest set off a chain reaction nobody predicted. Darnell's uncle, a longtime sergeant with a reputation for quiet racism, began pressuring Jake's supervisors to drop the charges and investigate the bikers instead for intimidation and illegal encampment. The fragile alliance between the off-duty deputies and the gang was suddenly under siege from within the department. And then a more dangerous figure emerged. Marcus and Jordan's father, the ghost from Arizona, heard about the viral story and decided he wanted his sons back, along with the disability checks that came with them. The bikers had become the boys' only line of defense against a corrupt sergeant, a vengeful street crew, and now a biological father with a legal claim. The question was no longer whether they could fix a house, but whether they could hold a family together against forces that had been crushing these kids long before Darnell kicked in a door. 3 days after Darnell's arrest, a dusty sedan with Arizona plates pulled up outside. The man who stepped out was thin, hollow-eyed, wearing a cheap suit and a smile that never touched his eyes. Terrence, Marcus and Jordan's biological father. He hadn't seen his sons in 4 years. He hadn't sent a single birthday card, a single dollar, a single word. But now he clutched a court order and stood flanked by a social worker who looked uncomfortable and a sheriff's deputy who didn't. The same sergeant who'd been protecting Darnell. Terrence announced he was reclaiming custody, claiming the boy's living situation had become unstable and dangerous due to the bikers' presence. The order was dated that morning, signed by a judge known to rubber-stamp favors for the sergeant's golf buddies. Crow and Rebar stood on the new porch, Jordan trembling behind them. The law was on the father's side, at least on paper. They had no choice. Marcus was wheeled out, pale and rigid with fear, and Jordan was pulled away screaming. The bikers watched them go, every fiber of their being on fire. But Crow gave a single, slow shake of his head. Not yet, not like this. The moment the boys were gone, the bikers moved. Lisa, the nurse, had spent weeks documenting Marcus's injuries, his medication needs, the precise routines that kept him alive. She'd also gathered records from the old days, hospital visits, child protective services reports, a file on Terrence that had been sealed, until a friendly clerk owed Rebar a favor. What she found turned their stomachs. Terrence had not just abandoned his kids, he'd been their primary abuser before the mother died. 2 separate CPS investigations had been opened years ago, both closed without action because a sergeant had vouched for his character. The same sergeant that now stood outside the house, smirking. The father wasn't coming back for love, he was coming back for the money. A renovated home, a viral story, and 2 disability checks that would now land in his pocket. It was a long con, and the corrupt cop was the muscle. The bikers' network mobilized. A lawyer from a neighboring chapter, a former public defender who traded burnout for a Harley, filed an emergency custody appeal. He dug up the sealed CPS records, the sergeant's intervention, even a sworn statement from a neighbor who'd once heard Terrence threaten to cash in on his kids' checks. But the sergeant countered fast. He accused Crow of assaulting Darnell during the arrest, pulling a grainy still from the journalist's footage that showed nothing but a calm line of bikers. A warrant was issued. Crow was picked up in front of the boy's house, cuffed and thrown into a holding cell. The sergeant personally oversaw the booking, leaning close to whisper, "Your charity act is over, scumbag." But here's what the sergeant didn't know. Jake, the off-duty deputy, had been wearing a body camera that night, not out of distrust but habit. The full footage showed Crow never lifting a finger, never stepping off the property line. Jake leaked it to the journalist. Within hours, the video was everywhere, millions of views, a perfect loop of restraint under pressure. The sergeant's frame-up collapsed in public. His supervisors, now under a national spotlight, suspended him pending an internal affairs investigation. The assault charge against Crow evaporated, and he walked out of jail that same night to a parking lot full of 40 engines rumbling in solidarity. Meanwhile, the legal team pressed the emergency hearing. Terrence's lawyer, a strip mall hack, argued the father's rehabilitation and rights. But the biker's attorney put forward a parade of witnesses. The nurse who'd seen the old scars on Marcus's ribs, the school counselor who documented Jordan's chronic hunger under his father's care, and a surprise witness, the older brother of one of Darnell's crew, a boy who turned state's evidence and admitted Terrence had been paying local teens to harass his own sons, softening them up for a custody grab. The courtroom went silent. The judge, a different one this time, revoked Terrence's parental rights on the spot, citing abandonment and a clear and present danger. The boys were placed in an emergency guardianship with Lisa, the nurse, who had already moved into the house to provide continuous care. The system, so long broken, had finally bent toward justice, pushed by an army of leather and chrome. But the most dangerous moment was still to come. Furious and cornered, the sergeant made one last, desperate move. 2 nights later, he drove to the house himself, off-duty, drunk and armed. He smashed the security camera with a tire iron and kicked in the back door, the same reinforced steel door the bikers had installed weeks earlier. It held. By the time he got inside, Tiny was already there, along with Rebar and 3 others who'd refused to leave until the boys felt safe. They didn't touch him. They didn't threaten him. They simply stood in his path and called Jake, who called the state police. The sergeant was arrested within 10 minutes, caught on a half-dozen body cameras, his career and his freedom dissolving in a single drunken act. The ring that had terrorized this family for years, the father, the sergeant, the street crew, was shattered in less than a month. Not with fists, but with presence, patience, and an unshakable refusal to become the monsters they were fighting. With the threat finally gone, the house became something it had never been, a home. Marcus had his new motorized chair, his medications, and a steady stream of visitors, bikers who dropped by with physics puzzles, with model engines, with stories of faraway places he'd only read about. Jordan had a button on a video doorbell and a tiny, cut-off vest hanging in the closet, not yet gifted but already promised. The neighborhood that had once pulled curtains now held block parties, and the old lady with the gumbo brought dinner every Tuesday. The question was no longer whether the bikers could hold a family together. The question was what happens when a child who's known only fear finally learns that the fiercest protectors can carry the gentlest answers. And that answer arrived on a Sunday afternoon, when Crow knelt down in front of Jordan and handed him something that would change everything. Crow reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small leather vest cut to fit a 10-year-old. On the back, a miniature death's head patch, and beneath it, one word in white stitching, family. He held it out to Jordan, his scarred knuckles trembling slightly. "You're one of us now. That means you're never alone again. Nobody touches you. Nobody hurts your brother. You understand?" Jordan took the vest like it was made of spun glass. He pressed it to his chest, crying silently, the same boy who had once run barefoot across hot asphalt begging a stranger for help. Marcus watched from the doorway in his new motorized chair, tears rolling down his face too, because for the first time in his life he wasn't afraid. The shield was real. The watch rotation didn't end when the arrests happened. It just became gentler. Bikers still slept over in shifts, but now they also came for movie nights, for homework help, for barbecues in the newly fenced backyard. Spider, the ramp contractor, spent his Saturdays teaching Marcus how to use a soldering iron, adapting circuit boards for voice-activated controls that let him operate lights, locks, and even his wheelchair with nothing but his voice. Tiny brought board games and read Marcus entire chapters of astronomy books, his booming voice never stumbling over the big words. Lisa, now the boy's legal guardian, kept meticulous medical records, but she also taught Jordan how to cook. The first meal he made on his own was grilled cheese sandwiches for the entire chapter. 40 bikers ate slightly burnt toast with the reverence of a five-star meal. Marcus's health stabilized. The neurologist Lisa had contacted adjusted his medications, and for the first time in years he gained weight, his face filling out, his eyes losing their hollow glaze. Through a foundation grant the bikers had long supported, he received a voice-activated computer system connected to an online high school for students with disabilities. He tore through physics and calculus like a man starved. One night Crow found him at 2 in the morning, still awake, solving differential equations on a screen that tracked his eye movements. "You're going to be an engineer," Crow said. Marcus looked up, almost smiling. "Aeronautical. I want to build planes that people like me can fly." Jordan, meanwhile, became the chapter's unofficial mascot. He attended bike nights at the clubhouse, always wearing his vest, always standing a little straighter because of it. The older members taught him to ride a bicycle without training wheels on a vacant lot they'd cleared, and when he finally balanced and shot across the pavement, 40 engines revved in celebration. That sound, once a herald of fear for the neighborhood, now meant safety, meant community, meant the exact opposite of what everyone had assumed. The final surprise came 6 months later. A reporter from a national network reached out, wanting to film a follow-up story. The bikers, who had always guarded their privacy, agreed on one condition. The segment had to highlight the chapter's charity network, not them. The resulting documentary short focused on the nurse, the contractor, the deputy, and the 2 boys who had been failed by every system until a man in leather decided to build a better one. It aired on a Sunday evening. By Monday morning, the chapter's charity hotline had received over 500 calls from families in crisis, from single mothers of disabled children, from elderly mechanics facing eviction, from people who had slipped through every crack in the floorboards of society. The chapter formalized what it had always done quietly, a rapid response network called Family First, staffed by off-duty nurses, lawyers, mechanics, and retired veterans. It was the same model that had saved Marcus and Jordan, now scaled to help strangers across the state. The boy's father, Terrence, was convicted of conspiracy and child endangerment, sentenced to 8 years. The corrupt sergeant received 5. Darnell was tried as an adult and accepted a plea deal that included a permanent restraining order and mandatory counseling. The house on the Cinderblock Street was never targeted again, but the real victory wasn't in the court records. It was in the sound of Jordan's laugh when Tiny taught him to throw a football, in the glow of Marcus's screen at 3 in the morning as he designed his first wing prototype, in the quiet certainty both boys now carried that they were not alone, had never truly been alone because family was not blood. It was choice, and 40 men had chosen them. And it all started with a barefoot boy, a gas station, and a biker who almost walked away but didn't. And it all started with a barefoot boy, a gas station, and a biker who almost walked away but didn't. What you take from this story depends on who you think the hero is. Some people see Crow, the Hell's Angel who chose presence over vengeance. Others see Marcus and Jordan, 2 kids who refuse to give up on each other. But the thing that won't let me go is this. For 6 months, that neighborhood watched those boys get destroyed. 6 houses, maybe more, heard screams and did nothing. The system that was supposed to protect them needed a gang to do its job. That isn't a failure of policy. That's a failure of guts. We all tell ourselves we'd open the door, that we'd be the one who stops, who listens, who helps. But 5 doors said no before the Tates opened theirs. A whole street pulled curtains while a teenager bled on the floor. The Hells Angels didn't save those boys because they were saints. They saved them because they knew what it felt like to be cast out. They recognized the look of someone the world had already decided wasn't worth saving, and instead of answering violence with violence, they built something. So I'll ask you what I had to ask myself. Would you have opened the door? If a terrified child grabbed your sleeve tomorrow, barefoot, pleading for his brother's life, would you walk past like the others? Not the answer that makes you look good. The real one, the one you feel in your gut when you're alone at night. Because somewhere, right now, there's a kid running down a road, hoping the next stranger will be a crow instead of another door that stays shut. If this story hit you, drop a like and subscribe so the algorithm sends you the next one. Share this with someone who needs to remember that quiet strength still exists. And if you want to be part of building something instead of just watching, leave a comment with the words "seventh door" as a promise to yourself that you'll be the one who opens it. The world has enough closed doors. Be the one that swings wide.